It's a nice, rainy, typical Seattle day. You're clicking through your iPhone, looking at your inbox, looking at the messages you've got. And you get one that's kind of intriguing. It's inviting you to be in a room full of game changers for one whole day at Stanford to talk about collective impact. Now, last April, I didn't get an imaginary email. It was a real email in my inbox. And I did mention it's in Stanford, and it was a rainy day, so I was very intrigued at first because I wanted to get out of here. And I might have skimmed a little bit the collective impact attachment that came with it. But I was really excited because I heard anytime you get together with SVP folks, you'll have really great wine, good food, really great smart people to talk about challenging things. But as I looked at the actual attachment that came with the invitation, I was a little bit intrigued and a little bit confused. I was intrigued because as community engagement manager, I wanted to be on the ground floor. If collective impact was the way that we could close the achievement gaps in K-12 education, I wanted to be there. I was confused, though, because I was wondering what's so special about collective impact and what's really great about this. And then we got to Stanford.
So at Stanford, sitting at the conference, at our conference room table, I was hearing about examples of successful collective impact stories, like the Strive partnership in Cincinnati. It was only about 2 hours we'd been doing that, and then we went for a breakout discussion, and we were asked to discuss how we would start our own collective impact initiatives. So I felt completely overwhelmed. I didn't know where to start. I kind of looked around in the eyes of fellow social venture partners and other strangers who were at my table. And I could see they were thinking the same thing that I was. How the heck should I know? I came to this conference so that the experts could tell me how. So we did some reflection, and I thought back on what the conference had taught us. And there were actually 5 conditions of success in order for collective impact to succeed. So I started with that. Number 1, a common agenda. Organizations that come together and have a single vision and align towards shared goals can move forward together more easily. Number 2, shared measurement. Data provides a common language that we can all use to track our progress together. If your goal is improving childhood education, you need to determine how that looks like and how you measure it. Number 3, mutually reinforcing activities. Each member in the collective is expected to contribute based on their own unique strengths on what they bring to the table. Number 4, continuous communication. If you have open and frequent communication, you build trust, you reinforce that commitment as well toward the goals that you're working on together. And finally, number 5, a backbone organization. You need a neutral party that doesn't have their own agenda to help support an infrastructure that the rest of the collective can rely upon to meet those goals.
So I'm a very visual person, but I didn't make a slide for you. But at the conference, what I did was I sat there and I thought about what examples of collective impact can I think of back at home? Austin mentioned the Strive partnership in Cincinnati, and it's a cradle-to-career initiative that looks at how we do education and wraparound services within that to make sure that each and every child in our system succeeds. Closer to home, there are quite a few different initiatives, especially around education, just like that. In the Highline School District, there's a really great organization called the White Center Community Development Association that does a lot of tremendous work around collective impact type things. Now, the challenges with collective impact is that you need all 5 conditions to be successful. And so in White Center, there are some really very specific examples of ways how they meet some of those conditions. But there are ways that they don't. So in the case of White Center, the common agenda that they've come around is exactly what Chris was talking about with 3rd grade reading levels. They've partnered pretty tremendously with the school district and with other partners in that area to be able to say, you know what, all of us are going to very specifically focus on making sure that as many kids as we touch are reading at benchmark at 3rd grade reading level when they go through our programs. That was pretty easy to come up with a common shared agenda. Everybody thought that was a great thing. once we had that shared agenda, it was really easy to say, you know what, we want to have some shared measurements so that we're all talking about the same thing. Now, on a lot of times with these collective impact initiatives, people don't know how to talk about that. You have community members, parents, students, even district people talking in very different tongues about the very same thing. So in this case, what they came together around was something very simple: attendance in school. How do you make sure that you can measure whether or not a kid is coming to school and why they're not there if they're not? So they shared some measurements around that. Then for the mutually reinforcing activities, they came together and said, you know what, we're not the experts on literacy. We're not the ones who know every last thing that needs to happen for a child to know how to read. But we are really great at being able to look at our shared goal around attendance so that kids will get to school to learn how to read. So why don't we capitalize on the relationships we have in the community so that we know when kids aren't going to be in school, so that we can partner with the teachers to get packets together for those kids who will be out. So they do mutually reinforcing activities that aren't necessarily the same thing, which is actually a good thing, but are very much mutually reinforcing of one another. So the next piece on the continuous communication, we started out with very loose meetings together, and then we got to a point where we said, you know what, we need the leaders of these organizations to have a standing meeting together. It can't be just, I saw you at the restaurant, let's schedule some lunch together. Let's have a standing meeting where we sit down and talk about the data, and we sit down and talk about what we're doing right and what we're not doing so well. Now, one of the challenges in White Center is that neutral party backbone organization. And that's a challenge that came up quite frequently at Stanford, that people said, you know, if I'm vested and I have my own agenda of what we're supposed to be working on, how am I supposed to get other people to come to my agenda? And that's a challenge, and that's not collective impact. One thing that White Center does that is not on our list of 5 conditions is they do really great work in community engagement. White Center Community Development Association was started by residents. It's run by an ED who's a resident, and those residents come together every year to say, this is what we want to work on in our community, and this is how we want to measure it. They're a vocal partner in it. White Center CDA understands that collaboration and collective impact are often confused with one another, but one thing they really understand is that collaboration in and of itself is not enough.
That's a good point, though. I mean, why is collaboration not enough? If you look at even how you frame collaboration versus collective impact, collaboration is more about leveraging, making up for deficiencies of organizations that maybe feel like they're not so strong in some areas, whereas collective impact, you focus on the strengths. You look at collaboration, you're talking more about process, kind of how you go about it. If you look at collective impact, you have to be focused on the results. And so organizations that collaborate well, they may meet often, discuss common goals, discuss common challenges, but the real difference, what really sets collective impact apart, is accountability, and that's important. So what does that mean for SVP in Seattle? I went to the conference in Stanford expecting to hear, successful stories of how collective impact was succeeding where traditional philanthropy is not. And I heard that, but I went to that conference expecting answers, and I came away with more questions. The exciting thing, though, is that the questions themselves are important, and we have a fresh opportunity together to carve a new path with SVP. And like many of you in the room here, I do like a good challenge.
I like a challenge, too. One of my biggest challenges within the concept of collective impact is that of those 5 conditions that you see, not a one of them says community engagement is core to what is supposed to be happening with collective impact. For me, it's a challenge, and I may be a little bit biased as the community engagement manager for Highline, I'll grant that. But it's really a challenge when we have lots of folks who look like me and look like you, Austin, and look like all of us in this room who often come together to talk about the challenges in a community and talk about the deficits and what we will do to fix a community rather than talking about what are the strengths in that community and how do we tap those strengths so that we can take it to another level. What happens is well-meaning people at lots of the meetings that I go to talk about the challenges of educating students who don't speak English instead of thinking about the gifts that those children bring to the classroom, not just for the other kids, but for the teachers and for the system as a whole. quite frankly, I'm challenged a little bit with collective impact in that I really don't need another new fancy term for how we talk about how we miseducate the rest of our kids in this country. Quite frankly, I need real results. And collective impact is hard work because when done right, it means that the community has to be at the table. And that begs the question for us. So we look around the room, who's not here? Is it important to us that those folks are here? And if it is important to us that those folks need to be here, how are we going to make that happen?
Some interesting questions. I think, too, that the important thing to note here, what Bernadette is saying, is that collective impact is not easy. It's not meant to be easy. It challenges us to work harder, to work smarter, to do more, and to do it better. And if you look at SVP, we work pretty hard. The history of SVP Seattle is impressive. Since 1997, partners have given over 25,000 hours of volunteer consulting time and donated more than $10 million to high-performing nonprofits to help them build their capacity. That is pretty impressive. At the same time, let's focus on being accountable. We talked about accountability. How are we tracking in terms of meeting our social outcomes, the goals that we set out to achieve through all the money that we're giving, all the time that we're investing as well? And how are we doing in terms of helping our investees meet their goals so that we can accomplish those social outcomes? I think it's important for us to ask that. Are we open to considering doing something a little different? For example, is working with individual organizations the best way to achieve those social outcomes if those individual organizations are not connected to broader, more community-wide initiatives? Something for us to think about. If you think about SVP Portland, they say they're all in. They are starting a backbone organization, it's part of number 5 in collective impact here, so that they can improve early childhood education in their communities. And SVP San Diego, they're taking this very seriously as well. They're convening this month to discuss how they can better align resources in their community to leave a more lasting impact. And actually, there are 2 partners here in this room tonight, SVP Seattle, who are charging ahead with this idea themselves. Bill Henningsgaard and Janet Levenger are taking that collective impact approach to education in Bellevue with their organization, Eastside Pathways. So we have to ask ourselves, are we open to this doing something different? Are we in? I'm going to leave those questions to you. But most importantly, what I want you to think about, and I want you to ask yourselves, is SVP Seattle ready to change the way we do business?